2, 3.
Last time you guys weren't here, and Pope, I know you don't know Marcus or Patrick. I've talked with both of these guys occasionally over the years, and Marcus I started working with from the Trails Off-Road perspective of things. Marcus runs the core Colorado Off-Road. What is that? Off-Road what?
Enterprise.
That's right. Colorado Off-Road Enterprise. And then Patrick, you're the organization that you made is the Colorado Trail Defenders?
Well, actually, both me and Marcus are in Trail Defenders. Marcus is the president. I'm the vice president. Trail Defenders is kind of a splinter group off of CORE that's kind of our legal advocacy arm to keep some of the legal advocacy work separate from the trail adoptions and maintenance work.
Okay, cool. And I know we talked about this before, but I don't think anybody on this in this entire meeting has anything except or does this full time. Like I don't off-road full time. I don't do the trails off-road stuff full time. I know Marcus doesn't do the core stuff full time now. Do you? You don't do that full time now, do you?
No, my wife and I own and operate our own business, so everything I do is just side work, strictly volunteer.
Yeah. And Patrick, I know you're in the exact same boat, and I can't even imagine, dude, that the document that you submitted for this decision is ridiculous, and I can't even. It's hard for me to comprehend the amount of work you put into that.
Yeah, it was crazy. I don't know that I would do that really ever again, and for anywhere except Moab. But yeah, wrote 500 pages. I basically spent the better part of a year on that. I'd pre-written a lot of it, although probably only about maybe a third to a fourth of it before the draft EA came out last September. So I've been kind of just preparing more general arguments, basically like the whole year leading up to that. And then I spent basically every spare moment I had, and probably a lot of time when I should have been working otherwise, just writing frantically the whole month of September last year, September and early October. Managed to churn out 500 pages of comments, and then it turned out the BLM didn't really pay attention to anything I wrote. So there was that.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't read the full 500 pages, but then again, it wasn't necessarily my job to do so. And then I was also on the same side of you that just, hey, I understand exactly what's at stake here and why we can't start doing that. So, all right, well, and then for you guys, then this is Pope of Gem and the Misfit on Instagram fame. He's out of Sand Hollow, Utah, and normally Randy is with him, and I almost feel like at some point Randy's going to crash the party if she manages to just show up before he's done recording tonight. So we'll see how that goes. Last time we talked to the last episode, we were talking a lot about Sand Hollow and Trail Hero. We're actually going to do another follow-up to that because we got so off topic and talking about all of the different individual obstacles and stuff that were going on there that we ended up not talking enough about Trail Hero itself, which is a giant event unto itself. And I'm thinking it's I have not been there. Pope, you said you've been there the last 3 years. Has it gotten bigger each year?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, and the funny part is that I probably should have gotten into I probably should have gone to this before it got so big, because now I probably won't want to go because it is so big. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you can spend, I mean, I've been on, I've just been an observer on things like Fins and Hell's Revenge and just, or more like Hell's Revenge, just watching people do that stuff all day. It's not my cup of tea, but I get why people do it. Oh, I'm pretty sure based on the videos I've seen that there are people that just camp there and, kind of do like the thing they used to do back in the day, just sit there and have a picnic and watch the wars down below. Just watching, waiting for the carnage. Especially with that kind of a concentration of people. Yeah. All right, cool. So yeah, we'll have another episode specifically just about the Trail Hero itself, as opposed to just the event and our host and how the time that they had there. Beside, we have a lot of stuff to talk about today anyway, so we won't spend a whole lot of time talking about the Trail Hero stuff anymore. Don't have a whole lot in the way of off-road related news today. We were talking a little bit earlier about this stuff, which is a little bit old now. The San Luis Obispo, they the title of this one is Environmentalists lose fight to close California's Oceana Dunes. If you had any knowledge of this beforehand, Oceana Dunes is basically an open OHV area that exists on the beach in California. Over the years, they've ratcheted down the amount of space that is available for people to kind of off-road in, and just kind of kept clamping it down, claiming that people were damaging the environment. And as it turns out, there was no actual evidence to support that. And part of the reason why I wanted to bring up that story was because after the California Coastal Commission decided to reject the closure of this beach because of that bunk science, I feel like it's an important note here, because I think a lot of, or at least part of what the justification was to close these trails in Moab was the environmental purpose of it. And I don't think that a lot of the evidence is going to pan out in the long term on that, but we'll talk more about that later. Let's see here. Does anybody know, is that done now? Like, is that, and I know that was the Supreme Court, or is that, no, that was a Superior Court justice. I don't know if they can do anything else with that. Can they appeal that ruling again, or are they done?
I'm not really familiar with the exact procedural history there.
I mean, this just says Superior Court, so I would assume that they could probably take it to the next highest level, which would be their state Supreme Court.
Yeah, probably.
All right.
I'm not personally familiar with that process, so I don't know exactly what's likely to happen.
Yeah, and I think that after I read a lot of the articles around this one, I don't think the state was familiar with their processes about this. I think there was just a lot of attempt by people to just kind of push this through as quickly as possible, and kind of hope that people wouldn't look underneath the paperwork and see that there was just a bunch of blank pages under there. In the area of just in general announcements and news information, the day before the Moab decision came out, Blue Ribbon Coalition announced about the Canyonlands West. I think it's the Owahis in Idaho. They're looking at potentially having more closures out there. The short story is that there's 756,000 acres and some popular mountains in here, including Juniper Mountain, Owyhee River, Battle Creek, and Mud Flat Road. They've done a travel management for that area, and they're now looking at closing a bunch of those trails, most likely. So go to the BRC's website, take a look at that area, and feel free to drop some comments, especially if you're local there in Washington. All right. So I don't want to spend any more time doing that stuff, because we got plenty of crap to talk about here. This is going to be enough for one day's stuff. Usually when we have you guys join our podcast, we want you to leave the podcast feeling good about things, feeling good about off-roading, feeling good about the future of the sport. Today is not one of those days. Today is one of those days that I hope you leave this discussion and turn your radio off today and you're a little pissed, and it might spur you to some action and hopefully you'll understand why. The BLM announced at the end of September that they are going to be closing 317 miles of trails in the Labyrinth Rim Gemini Bridges area. And that area will, honestly, there's just, it's not too many screens. We've got, today we've got Patrick McKay from the Colorado Trail Defenders and Marcus Trusty with CORE. And at some point in the near future, we're going to be having Ben Burr from the Blue Ribbon Coalition to talk about all of this. Today, and in this moment, we're going to dive in with what this means for the future of Moab, what this means for the future of our sport, and what we want to, if we want to keep it. Patrick and Marcus, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So, full disclosure, I've worked with Patrick and Marcus here in Colorado on a few different things, at least in just trying to coordinate efforts to make sure that we're all moving forward in the same direction. And Marcus and Marcus, do you still work with Trails Off-Road, or are you kind of independent from that now?
No, I'm still a writer, contributor for TO.
Okay, yeah. So we're both still active writers and contributors for Trails Off-Road, and in a roundabout way, in what I think is a great way, Trails Off-Road has now partnered with the Blue Ribbon Coalition for the Lost Trails book, which I will take this opportunity to plug. It's $25. Go to the BRC's website, and all the money then is turned around and sends you. It goes straight to the legal fund, and we'll get into why I think that's important later. And trail advocacy is great, but I think it's the future. And if we want to save our sport, I think the future is in litigation and legislation.
What's new in Volume 2?
What'd you say?
What's new in Volume 2? Is there new trails, or is there new additions like maps, or have you been?
Have it right here if you're talking about the Lost Trails guidebook.
Yeah.
Patrick, do you know exactly what they put in this book? I know I've kind of been through some of it.
I think Volume 1 was mostly concentrated on the Sanderfell Swell and Sanderfell Desert area.
Yeah,
Volume 2 has
exactly.
the Labyrinth Rim Gemini Bridges area in it, and then I think it also has some stuff in the Black Canyon corridor in Arizona.
Does it include the San Rafael Swell stuff from
some
before?
snowmobiling areas in Colorado and the Gmug National
Yeah, he
Forest.
was saying that's book 1, Pope. That's got the San Rafael.
Yeah, the Sanderfell area is in book 1.
So book.
Oh, and then they also have some, I think, in the
include
Trail
book 1.
Canyon area as well, down by Canab.
Your volume is a little low, Pope.
Let's turn that up a little bit. I'm kind of sitting in the middle of the two mics.
There you go. Okay,
That should be a little better for you.
that is.
So it doesn't seem to include the same stuff as Volume 1. So that's actually kind of neat. It gives you a reason to buy the new one.
Yeah, and I know I missed the first one, so I've reached out to get the copy of the first book, and I recently heard Ben talking about it, and I think he's very bully on making more of these books. I think on top of in a day of digital. I mean, even with the Trails Off-Road stuff, we love our app, and I love using those apps, Gaia and the rest of them when we go out there. But sometimes it's just nice to see these in hand. It gives you an opportunity to kind of, just put something physical to it. It's not just pixels on the screen.
Yeah, cool. I like having the Moab book for that kind of stuff when I'm in Moab. Everyone knows the Moab Bible book, the one that everyone has all the maps on it. And so it's even though I have all the digital stuff, I like to have that with me too. It tells me stuff that I can't see in the digital part.
Well, you never know. Look, I'm one of those people that I do my best to have 9,000 batteries and have all of the different things that I need to make sure that I can have everything running and not run out of juice when I'm out there on the trail. But I would be the first person to tell you there have been multiple times where I've been in the middle of something important where I've run out of juice, and a map is the main piece that I needed. So yeah, it's always good to have these. But most importantly, I think this is just a great advocacy thing for us. And I really hope at some point there comes a point we don't need this kind of stuff in the future. In the meantime, it it's at least something to put on the shelf and go, this is a sample of what we've lost. And now look, I've got a National Geographic stack worth of them behind me, and this is all the stuff that we've lost to date. So yeah. If you're in one of the cool things about this is in the back of this book, they've just got straight up coordinates for great campsites. And we can have a debate about whether or not it's good to be sharing coordinates and trails and stuff like that. But one of the BLM's arguments was that some of these trails weren't being used, and that's why they should have been closed, because they didn't pose any significant recreation.
And a lot of them, like, I imagine they're gonna close this big portion of Moab, and they're saying, oh yeah, hikers can go there, but then hikers aren't going to want to go on these long trails that are designed for Jeeps and off-roaders to go on, so they'll end up closing their trails for them too. And the same thing can happen to hikers and bikers as happening to off-roaders. Everybody needs to kind of pay attention to this. It's a real big problem.
Well, I think one of the surprising things that I've heard from a few folks who have talked with a lot of folks from the SUA group, or folks that believe that they were supporting, all trail access by supporting SUA, and then they're like, well, no, they're closing this campsite that you, a biker, are hanging out at.
Oh yeah, and Ben has a bunch of stories about that.
Yeah, and it's
people who are out camping just like around Mineral Canyon, I think, and and they've successfully managed to get them. Why?
Yeah, you've successfully started advocating against your own cause.
Yeah.
So we've kind of jumped ahead here. Patrick, you wrote the definitive, let's call it a novel. Can you give us a breakdown of real quick what happened in Moab?
Yeah. Well, kind of for a little background. Back in 2017, the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, SUA, had filed a lawsuit probably a few years earlier. I forget the exact date it was filed, but they basically challenged a bunch of the original 2008 travel management plans for a bunch of different areas of BLM land around Utah. And I think they won, at least in court, on one of those areas, where the court basically said, yeah, the BLM didn't apply the travel management route designation criteria properly, and they need to go back and do some reanalysis on that. And I think, that case only concerned one of these areas, that then there was a settlement that covered all of these different areas all across Utah. There's 3 different areas near Moab, 2 different areas near the Santa Fe Swell, 2 different areas down near Kanab, another area kind of by Hanksville and Poison Spring area and all of that. So it's kind of all over southern Utah. And basically the BLM agreed that they would redo the travel management plans for all of these areas. And these areas basically are the gems of the Utah Red Rock country. SUA is very strategic about where they selected this. And this is basically all the absolute prime, most beautiful areas of southern Utah, where there's just epic four-wheeling. It's all the best four-wheel drive trails in the state, really. And let's be clear,
this decision doesn't close these areas to hikers. It only closes it to motorized users.
Yeah. So that was what they agreed to do. They agreed to basically create new motorized travel management plans that just affect motorized users. And they would reevaluate all the routes that the BLM had already designated back in 2008, when they basically redid all the resource management plans and travel management plans for Utah. And that was when, I think before that, a lot of southern Utah was basically managed as open OHV areas. And that was when they basically converted all BLM land in the state, except for a few tiny areas like Sand Hollow, to limited to designated routes. And they closed a ton of stuff in all of these areas back in 2008. And then SUA said that wasn't good enough and they needed to close more. So the BLM agreed to redo all the different travel management plans for these areas. And they've been gradually working through that process. They've already completed 2 of those travel plans for the Santa Fe Desert and the Canyon Rims area, kind of up above Lockhart Basin in Moab. And so the Labyrinth Rims, Gemini Bridges area was the 3rd one of these plans to be completed. And you can kind of tell it made a difference who was the president at the time, because the Santa Fe Desert and Canyon Rims travel plans came out during the Trump administration, and those ended up being pretty reasonable. The Center for Hell Desert plan actually increased at least the number of designated trails compared to what there used to be, because the BLM hadn't done a complete inventory of the area originally. And Canyon Rims, it's a lesser used area around Moab, but it really didn't close a whole lot. It's something we could live with. It closed a few minor trails that really nobody was using, and that was about it. But then we've got this Labyrinth Rims, Gemini Bridges area, which it is basically the prime four-wheeling around Moab. It's everything basically northwest of Moab, between the Colorado River and the town of Green River and I-70, basically.
Right.
And so they've been working on that process for a few years now, and the decision just came out end of September on that, and ended up closing 317 miles of routes, including 4 different Easter Jeep Safari trails, and there's numerous other trails that are in published guidebooks that have been featured in guidebooks since the 90s. Just some of the most popular stuff around Moab.
Yeah, for those of you listening, I just kind of did a quick list. You had one that you gave me earlier today that I did not list in here, but all of these trails I was able to link to on Trails Off-Road, because we either have scouted them or actually been on, with our feet on the ground there. Day Canyon Point, Hey Joe Canyon, Mashed Potatoes, 10 Mile Canyon, Hell Roaring Canyon, Mineral Canyon, Hidden Canyon, and 7 Up, and 2 of the 3 overlooks on Dead Man Point. Those are just kind of the high profile ones, the names that you might have heard of before or been on out here before. That has nothing to do with the miles of stuff that you may have never seen before.
Yeah. Those are kind of some of the name trails, and there are a few more that, like, most people probably don't know the names. I know the names because I've researched this area so thoroughly, but kind of near Day Canyon Point, there's also called Pole Point and Major Point, kind of in the Bull Canyon complex. So those are closed. A bunch of other kind of overlooks of Hell Roaring Canyon, Spring Canyon, all sorts of stuff out on Dead Man Point and Spring Canyon Point.
Did they close Spring Canyon Point, or just everything off of it, basically?
Basically everything off of it. The main Spring Canyon Point road is what's called a County B road.
Right.
The way Utah BLM road classification works, there's B roads and D roads. B roads are basically graded county dirt roads that you can drive in a 2-wheel drive car. They're about the equivalent of what the Forest Service calls a maintenance level 3 road. And then there's D roads, which those are basically 4-wheel drive, unmaintained dirt track roads. And they're rough. You need a 4-wheel drive vehicle to drive them. You couldn't take your just average passenger car down them. They're kind of the equivalent of what the Forest Service calls maintenance level 2 roads. So the BLM kept open all of the County B roads in the area. They didn't even consider closing those, because those, it's kind of like there's sort of split jurisdiction between the BLM and the county, but the BLM has basically conceded, the county has jurisdiction over those. They're maintained by the County Road and Bridge Department. They're not going to close those. So all the closures they did were roads that were either classified as D roads or motorized trails, like the single track dirt bike trails and ATV trails. And
don't get and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm one of the things they tell you in radio is not to ask a question you don't know the answer to. Did any of these trails not have numbers or names? Like these were just trails that existed, and they went out there and said, "Yeah, we need to close these trails," because all of these trails, as far as I know, had a number attached to them. Like they had a designation that has been there for at least some period of time, right?
Yeah. They had this whole route inventory process, which it's basically the route inventory they took during the 2008 travel planning. Which that originally the route inventory was much bigger. The BLM already closed probably around a third of the trails in this area, third of the roads that were there in 2008. What the route inventory for this travel plan, it was only the subset of roads that were designated open in 2008. Even though, like, during the scoping period, I and a bunch of others commented asking them, like, well, if you're going to redo the travel plan, you need to also reconsider the closures from the previous travel plan, not just the roads that were designated open from the previous travel plan.
How
so
many?
That was one way they rigged it from the very beginning, is that they limited the route inventory for this travel plan to only the routes that were designated open in the previous travel plan.
Well, and honestly, that's something I want to talk about at some point too. Is they got 300 miles here, but that was they asked for 900, but their goal was at least 300, and they got what they wanted. And the next time they will just ask for another 900 miles of trails and get another 300 when they really only want that original 900 miles of trails that they asked for at the top.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad because it's a one-way ratchet the way this stuff works. Like once something's closed, they never really consider it again for reopening, but new travel plans get triggered by all kinds of things. And every time they do a new one, they close more. So
do we have any idea how many miles were closed in that original travel plan in 2008?
I don't have the exact figure for this area, but I think it was also a few hundred miles. So,
I mean, and we lost some in that one because of unmapped stuff, like stuff that wasn't on the inventory too. So
they didn't really do a thorough inventory either time.
Right. And basically what Patrick is saying, like you can boil it down. We don't win travel management. Like it's about how much we lose. How can we lower the amount of losses? So we lost it in 2008 with non-inventoried routes they didn't know they had or weren't on the inventory. Then inventoried routes that were closed. Then that wasn't good enough, and we had to redo it. And then we lost 317 more. Yeah. So it's like a three-pronged approach of what essentially happened here over a decade's worth of time, 2 decades worth of time.
And the anti-motorized groups are constantly trying to force the BLM to do new travel plans and redo it because they win every time it's redone. So in this case, they got it redone because of a lawsuit settlement where the BLM agreed basically the previous one wasn't done well enough. But another big thing that triggers new travel management plans is national monument designations. And we're seeing that in other areas of Utah with the Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears and the new national monument down in Arizona by the Grand Canyon. All of that, every time a national monument is designated, they have to redo the travel management plan again. And so like, in a few years, so won't come back and say, oh, the Labyrinth Rims area still isn't protected enough. Now you need to designate it a national monument and trigger another travel management plan where they close another third of the trails.
As a person who has in his past relatively believed in things like government, using things like designating something a national monument to do an end run around the public making a decision about their public lands infuriates me every time. And every time I hear it now, it's just like, oh, we want to designate a new national monument. We want to designate a new national monument. All of that's real great, except they don't really want to make a monument of it. They just want to lock it out.
Yeah, it's not like it was back in the mid 20th century where they were designating things as national parks, and then they'd come in and build a bunch of tourist infrastructure. They'd pave roads and build big trailheads and like cement walking trails and visitor centers and campgrounds and all of that. Like with these new national monument designations, they're not building anything new. They just close what's already there.
Right. And then I know. So, Marcus, we just kind of went through that here in Colorado with the PSI lawsuit, where we got sued to basically in the same kind of a situation, right? You want to talk about that for a hot second?
Exactly, and so that's the sue and settle tactic we call it, right? Where the anti-motorized groups, and there's a laundry list of them, don't like a decision, and then the goal is to get it back into travel management. Because like I said, we don't win that. It's just a matter of how much we lose. So Colorado was slightly different in that the advent of the modern NVM started in 2009. So that the Forest Service was directed to create a motor vehicle use map for all national forest lands. And their data at that time was not great. And there's a lot of stuff that went uninventoried during the original production of the NVM. And then over time, in years after that, they realized, well, we're missing a whole bunch of trails. And Jeep clubs and motorized users are like, hey, these maps are terrible. They don't show anything that's on the ground. So then they started adding things back to the NVM that they had missed in the past. And then that triggered a clause basically in the MVM rule where you have to do a NEPA analysis to add something to the MVM. So if we were to build a new trail, it would go through NEPA, it would be approved, we'd build the trail, then it gets added into the MVM. So it's kind of a weird scenario that a road had been there on the ground from mining for 100 years. It got overlooked, didn't make the map, and then adding it back in, they violated their own process that was then set in place. So one part of that challenge to the lawsuit of the PSI was because of that, adding routes to the MVM after it had already been done. And then the second was we had a 1984 forest plan done for the Pike and San Isabel National Forest, and some of the designations within the zones or quadrants were drawn incorrectly. Obviously, we didn't have GPS technology back in 1984. They were going off of, some field staff drawing on maps in offices, stuff like that. So we had a couple different routes like Twin Cone, Iron Mike, Champion Mill, routes like that actually crossed into non-motorized zones because the zone was drawn inaccurately. So that was part of the lawsuit too. Like Forest Service, you're allowing motorized travel in a zone that's designated non-motorized by your own forest plan. Right. So same thing. They settled that though, and the settlement required travel management across the entire forest. So we go through that one. I thought it was a lot until we get to this Moab plan, but we lost 150 miles of roads and trails in that one across 6 different.
Devastating to a lot of us. When that decision had just come out, I had just moved to Colorado. I was just getting my first taste of the mountains here. And then I was immediately told, this is all off limits to you.
Yeah. And it's kind of crazy comparing it now because that seemed like so much then that they closed. But then, now in Moab, they closed 300 miles. And in PSI, the percentage-wise, they only closed 4% of the route mileage. And here they closed about 30% of the route mileage.
I can't get over the staggering number to it. It's a lot for me.
And JD, that's one thing that some people don't quite quantify that, right? Like you and I and even Patrick, we map trails. So you're very familiar with the mileage, right? How much trail is 150 miles, or out in Moab, nearly 320 miles? I mean, we're talking if you look at examples here in Colorado, Badge of Honor Trail, Black Bear Pass, that's less than 10 miles, right? So that trail that's probably the most popular one in the entire state of Colorado is less than 10 miles. You know what I mean? Compare that to 320 about the amount of trails or the time on the trail that you lost, right? Holy Cross. Yeah. Holy Cross is less than 5 miles long. Chinaman is 6 miles long. Rimrocker
Hackett is 7?
Yeah. I mean, think about Rimrocker. That's 160 miles long from Montrose all the way to Moab on Rimrocker. And the Moab decision closed essentially 2 Rimrockers. If you went all the way over Rimrocker and all the way back, that's the amount of trail mileage that you would have traveled that was closed in that single plan. And it's a staggering number to us, and it sounds big on the surface, but I mean, we're talking about days, weeks, months worth of trail day trips to explore the areas and the amount of mileage that was essentially lost, both in PSI and then here in Moab too.
And example for Moab, Hey Joe Canyon, that's an Eastern Jeep Safari trail. They spend an entire day driving that. It's only 8 miles long. But so the BLM could say, oh, we only closed 8 miles. But no, now you lose an entire day of Eastern Jeep Safari.
100%. And it's an out and back. So that 8 mile trail essentially gives you 16 miles of off-road enjoyment, right? Because you're driving the 8 miles in and then you're driving the same 8 miles out. So we effectively lost 16 miles of off-road trail for a day trip that you could use for any number of reasons. 10 rigs go out there and all 10 people are enjoying the same thing, but maybe for different reasons, right? There's not a single quantifiable reason of why each person goes out there.
Yeah, and that was a nice challenging trail. It had a lot of good technical challenge and rock obstacles down along the river, climbing around. And
right.
Some I feel like you said before because you had a question.
Trails, nobody cares about them, but not that one, that's for sure.
Just readjusted.
That's all right.
No, that Hey Joe Canyon thing is a good point. That's a lot of miles. That's a whole day. I mean, that has negative impact on Moab's economy. It has to. Like not just Easter Jeep Safari, but all year round. Like people aren't going to go do that now.
Yeah, I heard Ben talking about this, and Ben said that the travel management plan. So the BLM said on one hand, there are too many people using these trails, so we have to close them. And then simultaneously said, but if we close all these trails, it's only going to reduce the amount of people that come here by 7,000 or some stupid number like that every year.
Yeah.
And then I don't understand how you have that both ways and then expect people to continue taking you seriously.
Yeah. No, they were arguing both sides of their mouth, the whole thing.
Yeah, is any of this legal? I mean, like, is it questionably legal? Is this why are they pushing the edges of their authority to see what they can get away with?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that the way the administrative state is set up, administrative agencies can basically do anything they want as long as they can come up with any kind of even halfway plausible reason for doing it.
They can get through courts.
Defer to them. And that's part of the reason we're in this pickle, because the courts have basically just allowed the administrative agencies to go out of control. And the Supreme Court showed a little bit of sign of starting to rein them in, but it'll take a while for that to have any meaningful impact. But yeah, so they come up with all these different reasons, and some trails they say are too used and are annoying like non-motorized users on the river, and other trails are not used enough. Like probably the vast majority of closures, they basically justified saying, nobody's using these trails. They're lightly used. They're starting to fade away on the ground. Nobody really cares about them. They have no recreational value. Or so a lot of them, they just arbitrarily decided were redundant because they just kind of happened to go the same general area as another trail.
So this trail behind me that's on the monitor is D2678, and I was reading up on it in the travel management plan. And this trail managed to survive. Ben's comments and I think your comments on this one were cited in there as it being a scenic route. But there is a route off of this one or right next to it that is closed now as a result of this travel management plan. So if you wanted to go out this direction and maybe camp on this spur and then maybe get away and then take that extra step to get away from people, you can't anymore because the BLM said, well, you know what, there's two roads here, so we're just going to close this one to the right because.
Yeah, in D2678, they actually closed half of it. They kept part of it open, but they closed half of it.
Oh, so I'm guessing a lot of the footage here is actually no longer open.
Yeah,
and honestly, if you can't get to the top of Hey Joe there anymore, it's not a worthwhile trip.
Yeah, I think they left open the part that accesses. I think there's a hiking trail that goes down into Hey Joe Canyon from there, and I think they left open basically until you get to the place where that hiking trail splits off, and then they closed it past that. But past that, it kind of loops back around more toward the main rim of Labyrinth Canyon, and just a short distance from the end of that trail is where there's a cliffhanger arch. So you can't get to that anymore because now you'll have to do a much longer hike. But yeah, this trail used to go basically right almost to where Cliffhanger Arch is.
So I want to touch base again with you on the legal aspect of that when it comes to the hiking piece of it, because we've talked about this on other podcasts, and I will continue to talk about this until the cows come home. But part of the reason why I use a Jeep and I use a motorized vehicle to get around is because I'm not a terribly old person, but I don't have the body to be a hiker. I never have, but at this point in my life, I don't have any cartilage left in my knees. There's a whole litany of things broken in my back that won't allow me to do extended walks like this. These routes, while they are traversable and they are technically not closed to people on foot, they're closed to me, and they're closed to millions of other people like myself who just can't get out there by themselves, whether or not it's their own doing or just because of its bad genetics. So, well, I'll ask you straight out. I know the answer that I've received from organizations like the ACLU when I brought this stuff to them. Do you know if there's any kind of a legal standpoint from the disability perspective of things and limiting these trails?
It kind of depends. From the Americans with Disabilities Act, no. because that basically just requires you to give people with disabilities equal access to everyone else, like on the same terms. And then there's like rules for building handicap ramps for buildings and stuff like that. But in terms of public lands, it really doesn't have anything to say about this. One interesting wrinkle is like right after Joe Biden came into office, he signed this executive order that basically directed all of the administrative agencies to promote equity. And it was mostly about racial equity and all this racial stuff in there. But one thing it included in that executive order is people with disabilities. And then all the administrative agencies had to go and produce these things they call equity action plans. And the Department of Interior actually did identify access to public lands for people with disabilities as an issue that they're trying to address in their equity action plan. Now, we don't really know if that gives us a legally enforceable cause of action that we can pursue in court. It'll certainly be an argument we'll make, I'm sure, but it's not really clear if that's going to be having it's at least something.
And I will say this. Okay, thank you. And what I will say to that is, and I'm at the place of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks at this point. Like that's been everybody else's and the people on the other side of this issue's, MO to date. And there's no reason not to take that same tact and just keep trying every single different way that we can address this. I can't describe to you all how much it infuriates me that I will probably never get to the bottom of Hey Joe Canyon. It's not going to happen unless this, unless the legal challenge and or there's some sort of a stay in these closures or something like that. I honestly it doesn't feel like that's going to happen. So I've probably seen as much of Hey Joe Canyon from the top of Spring Canyon Point that I ever will. And it's maddening.
Same with a lot of people.
Yeah.
I personally am lucky that I'm young and fit and I can hike if I want to. And usually when I'm out in places like Moab, I do a mixture of hiking and jeeping, but this even makes hiking access a lot more difficult because places you could jump off of roads to then do hikes along canyon rims or different places. Like now you have to hike a lot further to even get to that. And a lot of these places, it's like, they're beautiful areas overall. And they're really fun to just kind of go through on a vehicle where it's fairly low effort and you can take lots of pictures out the window of your Jeep and stuff. But I don't know, are they really worth like spending the effort to do a whole day hiking out there? I'm not sure. There's not a particular destination. If I'm going to plan a hike in Moab, I might rather go somewhere like Corona Arch where there's like a specific destination you're hiking to. And it's like a really special thing that you can only get to by hiking. So would I take the actual effort to hike some of these closed roads and go like 8 miles across a mesa top just to reach an overlook of the canyon? I probably wouldn't.
And sometimes it depends on who you're with too, right? Like, so I'm physically fit. I could hike down into Hey Joe Canyon, but the last time I was there, I had two of both my boys with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like one is 6 and one was 2. There's no way that I'm going to hike them down there. And then my wife's parents. So my in-laws were with us too. So like 3 different generations of a multitude of ages have the opportunity to go down in Labyrinth Canyon, to enjoy Hey Joe Canyon, to climb around on the old bulldozer there, to check everything out. And 2 ends of that spectrum would not be there if it was just, out to hiking. So it just, the more details you bring to it, the more it infuriates, those of us that understand the magnitude of this type of a decision.
Yeah. And again, if you're listening to this, I want you to walk away from this today pissed. I think you should walk away pissed. This is kind of stuff has been going on for a long time. And to like what Patrick was saying, this process was started in 2008. Like this isn't a new thing that they got to today. They just managed to find a good moment to strike and kind of close that and get the most out of it that they wanted to.
And not even really 2008. In Utah, the fights over roads go back decades, probably the 1970s or so. I actually found a whole book called Roads in the Wilderness. It's kind of a history book that describes all of the conflicts over wilderness and road access and stuff in Utah, going back really to the beginning of the environmental movement back in the 1970s. And when they were
your book, or is that just a book that's out there?
That's a book I found and read.
What's it called?
It's called Roads in the Wilderness.
Okay.
Look it up, who it is.
I'm always willing to check out something new. Cool. Yeah. All right. So really quick, while he's looking that up, Marcus, because I want to talk about, I want to talk about. Okay, cool. Thank you. I want to talk about motivation. I think that a lot of this stuff is wrapped in the guise of we're doing this to protect the environment, or we're doing this to protect this specific bighorn sheep or something like that hasn't ever needed protection from vehicles before, suddenly needs protection now. Do you think there's more of do you think this is more motivated from a pure standpoint, a pure science standpoint, if you will, we want to make sure that the environment is taken care of, and we think that people's oil dripping out of their things every time they go out there and all that kind of stuff is causing issues? Got anything?
Yeah, I mean, so we've participated in projects, in a local one here for camping, that I think had somewhat of an objective process. They were looking for input. They were looking for opinions and information to try and make the best management decision they could. But then on the flip side, we see, and you brought one of them, well, both of them up at different points in this podcast, and then Moab would be the third, where there is a definite endpoint to a project or to a decision that a group wants to get to. And then everything that starts to come out and starts to line up in that, whether or not it's a big deal or not, or whether there's a negative impact or not, it's starting to steer towards the goal or the end point, right? Like Oceano Dunes. So California Coastal Commission wanted motorized access eliminated from Oceano Dunes. And they've been chopping sections out over the years and restricting the areas of access over, frankly, faulty science that the gal from the Scripps Institute 100% matter-of-factly refuted. But it was never about the science, right? It was about eliminating OHV use from the dunes. And then here in Colorado, we're litigating over the PSI decision over a number of different routes, and the routes in Wildcat Canyon is the main part of that lawsuit that Patrick and myself and Core brought against the forest supervisor for that decision. And what we had found out through FOIA and through the research, years of work, is that those routes were never objectively looked at to be opened. The decision was always to close them. The decision behind the scenes. We have emails from Forest Service employees conspiring to figure out how they're going to game the system to get the outcome that they want. And then you go back and you look at the Moab plan, and it's very, very similar when it's driven by SUA, and they've wanted this area as wilderness since the early 1980s.
It starts to smell the same, right? It starts to smell 100%. Like I've seen this story before. Like this was the decision you wanted to get to, and everything up to this point has been an effort of that decision and to get to that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you start to line stuff up towards it, right, Patrick? I mean, you can talk about some of the specifics. You mentioned wildlife. So like the bighorn sheep herds, there are some of the strongest numbers in the state of Utah. The fitness level of the herd is some of the strongest numbers in the state of Utah. There is no data or evidence to suggest that bighorn sheep there, desert bighorns, are habitat limited. So they are not limited by the available habitat just to the Gemini Bridges Labyrinth Rims travel plan area. They are not disturbed. Bighorn just in general as a species, the human interaction with them does not cause population level decline. It doesn't across anything. But
I've never encountered a bighorn sheep that gave a shit about who I was and where I was.
Yeah. Exactly. But when we say it's bighorn sheep habitat, it's lambing habitat, this decision to close this road will quote unquote improve habitat. It's trying to make bighorn part of the argument. So the unknowing person would think that, and you know this as well as I do, JD, because we've seen them out there, right? That if you drive on a trail and you see a bighorn sheep and they put their head up, they look at you, or they walk in the other direction because you are there, they want the public to believe that has a population level negative impact on the bighorn sheep herd. which is 100% unsubstantiated out there. That has never been documented in this area to be the case.
Yeah. And in some of the BLM's management plans, they'll even admit that, bighorn sheep get habituated to human activity, that as long as it's kind of regular and predictable and follows a predictable route, they don't care. And that's what you see in the real world. Like, a few miles away from my house is this place called Waterton Canyon in Denver. That it's one of the most popular recreation sites right near southern Denver. And it's a dirt service road along the river that people hike along and bike along, and there's hundreds of people in there every weekend. And it's also this place that bighorn sheep love to hang out all the time, and they're just sitting there right along the trail with hundreds of people milling around right there, and they don't care. So it's like,
I mean that
bighorn sheep are disturbed by vehicles and it's harming their survivability in this area is just ridiculous.
Well, and that's if you ever see them in the first place.
Yeah,
like I have been wheeling in Colorado now for hardcore for the last 7 years. And I will tell you that in all of those times, and my favorite trails are the Argentine Pass and the Red Cones and all those above the timberline kind of trails, I have actually myself only run into a bighorn sheep ever on what was called Mount Evans, Mount Blue Sky, or whatever the hell it is that they're calling it now.
Yeah.
That was on a paved road, right? That thing gets hundreds of thousands of travelers every year, and those sheep don't seem to give a shit. This trail behind me, the D2678, one of the things that they cited as closing the spur trail from it was because of sheep. I didn't see people, let alone animals, out there. So,
and one other thing is, even if that was a substantiated concern, let's say there is documented evidence that there is an impact for vehicle and people interaction. There's things we have in Colorado called seasonal closures, right? And we're all very familiar with those. There are management prescriptions in place on the books right now to effectively deal with that while not locking the public 100% of the year out of the area. Like we have that for calving areas for elk. We have that for other big game herd and big game management. So if that were specifically a concern during sensitive times or lambing or whatever, they could have a seasonal closure. Now, I'm not saying that the evidence suggests that is warranted here, but if it were, outright closure is usually the last resort. That's when you can't mitigate a negative impact.
For a few of these.
You can't do anything,
but
right?
I don't feel like seasonal closure was even a topic discussion.
No, it wasn't. That's what I'm saying.
Seasonal closure for some of these trails, and then they went with the more extreme option instead, fully closed.
So we just went right to closure. No middle management. We could have chosen middle grade management and see how it worked for the next 5-10 years. See if anything changed. Again, if there was negative evidence to suggest that we do it, but no, it was right to the end. Last management objective we have, and the hardest to ever undo, closure.
Yeah.
Right.
And going back to what Marcus was saying about kind of the end goal here, like in this area of Utah, the end goal is called the Red Rock Wilderness Act. It's this perennial wilderness bill that SUA has been proposing for ever since like the 1980s. No congressional representative from Utah supports it, so they've been having a congressman from Illinois introduce it for the last 10 years at least. And so that's the goal, is they want all of this to be converted to wilderness, and they will get there by any means necessary. And it just turns out that the bighorn sheep lambing habitat, if you look on how it's mapped, the area considered bighorn sheep lambing habitat almost directly overlaps with the areas they propose for wilderness. And so their management plan says they're not supposed to be managing this area for wilderness characteristics. So they're like, okay, well, we can manage it for bighorn sheep. And those areas basically just line up almost exactly. So we're going to close everything in bighorn sheep habitat and expand areas that have wilderness characteristics, even though we just won't talk about the wilderness characteristics part of it. So it's all just a game, like what justification they can come up with where.
Well, and I believe I had heard that it initially had been recorded. The initial wilderness designation had been everything on the other side of the river.
Yeah. Back in 2019, in it's called the Dingle Act, Congress actually designated the Labyrinth Canyon Wilderness Area on the western side of the Green River on Labyrinth Canyon. and that's more over in the San Rafael Desert area. That was already a wilderness study area. They basically just took the wilderness study area and converted it to a designated wilderness area. But part of that whole compromise, the wheeling and dealing that went into getting that bill passed was the Utah congressional representatives agreed to support that in exchange for kind of an understanding that no, that was going to be where the wilderness was going to be designated in this area. There wasn't going to be any more. Designate the west side of the canyon wilderness, keep the east side where all the motorized routes are by Moab open to motorized use, and keep all those existing roads open. And now the environmental groups, as they always do, reneged on that. They took that as a stepping stone to say, okay, well, now we need to complete the wilderness area and make the east side of the river wilderness.
Right. And that's the thing is I don't think that if anybody is telling you that it just came to their mind that they wanted to expand that wilderness area past the river, then I have some oceanfront property to sell you in Arizona, because the goal has always and will always be to continue to close those lands off to folks that they don't want to spend time with. And in this case, it's OHV and motorized recreational users.
Yeah.
And in one case, Patrick, tell me where it was. There specifically was said in there that mountain bikes are also outlawed in certain sections of this because it says no mechanized use.
Yeah,
on
most
several
of these
of these roads,
close to motorized users.
Exactly. So and that's the key from BLM's perspective, that they left that detail in there, which really would even clue somebody who doesn't maybe know the process behind the scenes like all of us do now, is that what can't you do in a wilderness area, right? There is no mechanized use at all. So you can't ride a mountain bike in a wilderness area. So if they're closing the trails, quote unquote, to OHV use, but then also extending that closure to say no mechanized use whatsoever, that is 100% the precursor to wilderness. Like there's no mistake about that.
And that's kind of just a function of the fact that the Moab Field Office already has a rule in place limiting mountain bikes to either designated mountain bike trails or motorized routes. And so they could use all of these roads too. And now that they're closed to everybody, they can't in most of the cases. There were a few of the trails where they were also designated mountain bike trails, like 7-Up. And so they did make exceptions for those and say, okay, these are closed to motorized, but open to mechanized. But most of these are not. So mountain bikers also lost 300 some miles of routes that they could ride around this area.
Yeah, that's crazy. Hopefully that's something that you don't even think about, is that the impact that those people are having too. You always think about, oh, it's my Jeep trails are closed, but anything that's a mountain bike, even, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I'm really
a bunch of other groups that are affected by this. Mountain bikers lost a bunch. Campers, base jumpers is a weird one that most people probably don't think of, but there's a popular area called the Fruit Bowl off of Mineral Canyon, and it's basically this big area where they go and they string this giant rope net over a box canyon, and then people go and slack line over to it, and they'll like base jump off this thing and parachute down to the bottom of Mineral Canyon, and then have a vehicle waiting at the bottom to take them out via the Mineral Canyon Road. Well, they closed the Mineral Canyon Road down below there. So like now the base jumpers, when they fly down from the top, are going to have to hike out to the nearest open road before they
Which is just not going to happen, right? They're just going to go someplace else, and they're going to concentrate. There's going to be more base jumpers using less space.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pope.
Yeah, so we've been, like, you could have sold me some of your oceanfront property in Arizona, I think, because, like, as new off-roaders, we're in this like 3-something years, right?
Right.
So we're kind of new to this whole caring about the off-road trails getting closed stuff. And so this is something that I didn't realize has been going for decades.
Oh, yeah.
And I may have even been at some point been like, yeah, who cares about those trails? But, you see what it actually impacts. It impacts everybody one way or the other. Like, there's a lot of trails you can't go hiking now because the road to get to the hiking spot is gone.
Yeah.
And it's, it's a different perspective. It's kind of neat I'm glad to be on this podcast with you guys today, because you educated me quite a lot.
You know what? And that's awesome. I'm good, because we need more people to be in the know with this. Like the places like Sand Hollow that are kind of the open OHV, and Sand Hollow is a little bit newer, so they might have done a better job of keeping areas from getting taken back at some point down the line.
They're even willing to sell parts of Sand Hollow to developers and let them build neighborhoods on it. It's not even about the environment there. It's a money grab. And they don't care. Like, they wanted to build a reservoir out of a beautiful canyon that has a handful of trails going through, but they want to make that into a reservoir out there. And there's no reason to make it a reservoir. They just want to flood the freaking thing. Like, well, what difference is flooding it going to do to the environment or the ecosystem there versus somebody driving on a sand dune nearby? It's crazy that they're even contemplating that. And I just read somewhere the Forest Service is thinking of selling out parts of the land, the parts of the forest that they don't want to manage anymore.
That was Representative Gosar of Arizona, maybe. His proposal was that since administrative agencies were claiming they did not have enough people to manage these resources, let's just sell it off to private entities. Because that'll fix it.
And then you get things like the Lions Back Resort down in Moab, where it becomes like the Uinta National Forest Resort, all inclusive. It's crazy. But it is. It's kind of it's all over the map. I mean, there's people who genuinely care about the environment, and then there's people who are just like what we saw in Sand Hollow, and they're still fighting it. But they were trying to build a new reservoir out of the West Rim area. They want to sell it to somebody to make a development out of it. They want to do a land swap with somebody for something else so that they can develop neighborhoods on top of our trails.
Yeah.
And that's even more like, that's worse than closing it for the environment, in my opinion.
Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people fail to recognize, that one of the reasons, like, I'm a pretty liberal person about a lot of things, and I believe that we have just done a lot of things to screw up the environment over the years. I know that in off-roading, and based on my experience over the last 7 or 8 years alone, off-roading isn't causing the environmental problem as being claimed that it's causing. It's just not. It's being used as an excuse because one group says, we don't want this other group out here, period.
Totally. And JD, you could take it a step further, right? Like environmentalism, and that's usually used as a relative term now. It means different things to different people, right? But you take look at like cleaning up national forests, removing trash. We remove abandoned campers. We de-water roads. We build water bars. We prevent erosion. Like, the off-road community has got to be the best environmentalists of any other volunteer group, because the crazy environmental groups are the ones that sit in offices and file lawsuits, and they're not out there on the grounds actually doing the work. It's the off-road communities that are out there trying to keep people on the trail, restoring off-trail issues, keeping people out of the wetlands, educating the public, doing all of these things. That, by definition, is environmentalism, and quite frankly, is conservation at the same time. That is being done by the off-road community. And it's right there in front of everybody's face to see that we're the stewards of public lands, doing those great things, but yet we're also cited for damaging the environment at the same time. And we can't go out there.
And the rhetoric they use is crazy, because like the environmental groups, they will do in the field projects if they get to block off a new motorized route that was just closed.
Oh yeah,
big headlines about that. It's driving me crazy. Some stuff I've seen in PSI, the groups were fighting there, how there were all these roads that were just closed in PSI. And then these anti-motorized groups are putting out headlines like, oh, we're going to go have a work project to close off all these illegal motorized routes. And it's like, well, they were legal routes until 5 minutes ago, and they were closed because you wanted them closed. They weren't illegal before. But, so they'll do projects to build fences and barriers and block off formerly used roads.
And I don't want to get lambasted on Instagram or any place else. And let me preface this by saying, I don't think that we should stop doing those trail maintenances. I don't think we should stop putting information kiosks at the beginning of trails. I don't think that we should stop putting buck and rail in to keep people on the trail. I don't think that we should stop doing any of those efforts. But I will tell you that I think as a group that likes this sport and as people that want to continue doing the sport, I feel like there needs to be a massive shift where we need to say, okay, that was our focus for a good 10 or 20 years of our existence as a motorized group. And we really tried to put our best feet forward and show that we're out here doing the best for our communities that we can. And what we got for it was thousands of miles of closures and absolutely no recognition of the fact that these trails and us being on them are some of the best stewards that you can have for it.
Yeah.
Agreed, 100%.
We participate. Yeah, I agree too. We participate in lots of trail cleanup activities. Like we go through the local canyon out here, American Fork Canyon, with our Jeep Club. We do trail maintenance. We pick up a lot of the trash and garbage on the trail, and then just recently we did a 5-mile pass cleanup, which is a big BLM area actually.
Yeah.
And we went through that whole area, and it is spotless, man. Like these areas get cleaned up, and they look immaculate for the next person to come the next time. Like, we do a tremendous amount of work to make these areas good for ourselves and for everyone around us.
Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, I know Marcus will tell you that. Yeah, go ahead, Marcus.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what you're alluding to is a little bit shift in our focus more to motorized advocacy, right? Like,
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. We can still do the cleanups. We can still do the volunteer work. We can still do the education piece. But there's a large percentage of the public that off-roads that thinks that these closures were warranted because people were bad stewards of our public lands, right? Like they think if we would quit trashing our public lands, or maybe they're mad at side-by-sides and they think that that's why this got closed, and it wasn't. Like, this was in the pipeline before there was even a side-by-side machine, before there was volumes of public land users out there. So while we still want to do all the good stuff and promote education, ethics, and land use in stewardship, if we shift a little bit more towards motorized advocacy, we could be a very powerful group to work towards keeping trails open on that front.
And what we need to follow is kind of the model that mountain bikers have followed, because I think for a long time, mountain bikers were kind of an anathema group out there, and kind of the outcasts that everyone was trying to keep out. And they just focused really heavily on legal advocacy and basically just forced their way into having a right to recreate on public lands. And and I've done that to that extent. And so that's where we need to focus on.
Exactly. And I think there is an honest discussion that we can have as a group of Jeeps versus side-by-sides versus, single track and all the rest of that stuff. But at the end of the day, we're all, I would say to you, I think the examples that we have are, a lot of those examples are outliers to the vast, 95% of the people who are out there on your public lands. But more importantly, I think there comes a time in any kind of a fight where you just kind of got to put some of those personal differences behind and be like, we can have those discussions internally, and we can have those discussions amongst other people in our sport. But we need to present a more united front. So we need to have the OHVers and the e-bikers and the mountain bikers and the hikers that we can actually reach out to, and all those other groups of people that are willing to fight the same battle forward. And we need to start putting our money where our mouth is. Like in previous years, I have donated money to political campaigns and things like that. But after learning what I have learned in the last 8 years about land, public use land, all of my money goes to groups that are fighting for public lands. So whether or not that's CORE or BRC or the Colorado Trail Defenders or whatever group, and feel free to put in your comments of the podcast any group that I need to know about so that we can start bringing them up. We need to get on the same page, and we need to start pushing in the same direction. We got to get out of the place where, Marcus, you're talking about the sue and settle stuff. Like, they're going to continue to sue us as a group, if you will. And there's no look, there's no reason, if you're listening to this, that you should look at this as anything except an attack on what you like to do. They closed a third of your roads in one state, in one small area alone. Patrick, how many, you said that was the third plan, right? How many more plans are there for that region?
I forget the exact number. I think it's like 8 more, something like that.
Jeez.
I think there was around 10 or 11 total.
If you're listening to this, do you want to lose another 2,000 plus miles of trails? Because
basically, the only thing you'll be allowed to do is fencing things down in Moab. That'll be it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there are tons of other awesome trail systems that are at risk with this. Like the 2 of the 3 in the Moab area are done now. So the third one is kind of out by the top of the world area. So who knows what'll get closed there. Top of the world could be closed, or at least partially. The boundaries are kind of screwy. Where like half of the top of the world trail is in that.
I don't know if they're going to do that. That Ford's got their Bronco Center right along that same road there. So
yeah, but it's kind of that whole area out there, kind of getting toward the Dolores River canyons and stuff. So yeah, that area will be up next in terms of Moab. Probably the next really big fight is going to be the Santa Fe Swell, because they already got a ton of that area closed with wilderness designations in 2019, but that's still not good enough for them. And so the main Santa Fe Swell area is going to be probably the next travel plan to really be worked on. And who knows what will happen with that one. Then there's some cool areas down by Kanab.
Well, and then in the future, that
where the Barracks Trail is, the Hog Canyon Trail system. Yeah, there's a lot of amazing wheeling that's at risk with these plans.
Well, and then again, that wilderness designation is so they can come back in 10 years and say, well, look, now we need to expand this wilderness designation for X, Y, and Z reasons. So, yeah, I can't.
And that's only the settlement agreement travel plans, because there's also many travel plans for Bears Ears National Monument, which is basically everything south of Moab. And then
what's the Bears, is the Bears Ears one they want to close? What's that? The side of Maryland or Delaware?
Yeah, it's a huge area. It's most of San Juan County, which itself is, I don't know, like an 1/8 or 1/10 of the state of Utah. It's pretty big. So they want to look at the map.
I looked at the map, and it's just a sea of red. Like, it's just, we just want to close all of this.
Yeah.
So, Marcus, we kind of touched base on it earlier, and Patrick, I want to bring you back to. I would love to talk about Wildcat Canyon again at some point in the near future.
Yeah.
Because that's, it is right along this line, and I really think that it's. I am not a person that easily believes in conspiracies, and that there are groups of people that are actively working in positions of power to steer things in their own direction, and that they can do that without a whole lot of checks and balances. And I know what I found out through the PSI situation and the Hackett Gulch and the Wildcat Canyon stuff was that, it's when you start talking about public lands, especially, that's not necessarily true. There's a stunning lack of oversight out here for these folks.
Yeah.
Like, BLM is not elected. Forest Service is not elected. Those people, and then they can make these decisions kind of unilaterally. They don't have to report to a voter in any way, shape, or form. I mean, hell, your sheriff arrests people locally, but he still has to be elected.
Yeah. And all the work with public lands has really convinced me, like, in most respects, the United States is not a democracy anymore. Like, our elected representatives make only a tiny fraction of government policy, and most of it's made by unelected bureaucrats. And like, that's what we run into with all the public lands, because Congress set very broad parameters and then basically just washed their hands of it and left the entire management of public lands to these technocratic agencies that they think they know what's best because they have the science on their side. And so they just take policy, and people have to live with it. We have no democratic say in it.
My dad was in politics. I'm a pretty idealistic person, but I've reached the point where I recognize that we are in a state of both politics, real or imagined, right? Whether or not you think that there are problems or they're not, the only way that you get anything accomplished anymore is by being the loudest voice in the room. And if you're the loudest voice in the room with the most money, then you can do the most in your favor, or the most that you want to get to move your agenda forward. And if your agenda is to close up X amount of number of parcels of land or acres of land in this country, then you're going to put all of your resources and effort and money into doing it. Damn the elections. None of that matters.
Yeah. I think there was one example. Patrick said this several months ago on the San Juan Mountain Trails group locally here in Colorado, is that a lot of our group, for whatever reason, like in the public, wants to remain apolitical. And by group, I mean motorized users, right? Like they don't want politics to invade their recreation. And full credit to Patrick, because I read his comment and he said, sometimes politics finds you, right? Yeah. Like you can't hide for it forever. Sometimes it finds you. And Wildcat Canyon would be a good example to talk about, but sometimes it's even more local than a federal agency. I mean, let's all be honest, Black Bear Pass never opened this year because of politics within a specific county, right? Like that is as local as you can get a county, an individual county in Colorado that then is prioritizing something within their county to exclude a trail.
Almost specifically, the sheriff has decided he wants that road closed.
Nationally renowned, and you can have the political influence locally to have that happen. And so, like, obviously, that happened after we filed the litigation with Wildcat Canyon. But we really felt in Wildcat Canyon, not only was it a dirty issue, I mean, really bad, if you know the long history of what happened there, but it sets up other things that are still to come. So we just went through the GMUG Forest Plan Review, the Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre, and Gunnison National Forest, which is the largest national forest in the state, right? So we got a decision on that. It's still open for the objection phase. But after that, then we're going to enter into other management level projects that'll be run in the future based on that plan. We have the Rio Grande National Forest that had their forest plan update that was litigated over for winter travel and different things. And then the Pike San Isabel one is still 1984, and that one will be coming down the pipe at some point once all of this is wrapped up to go through a new forest travel management plan or forest plan for PSI. So like these things are teed up that are well out into the future, that are coming down the pipe, whether there's a sue and settle thing that goes on in between or not. Like we are facing that in the future. And if we don't get things, figured out, hopefully through the legal system of how this process is going to work and how they're going to interpret their own data or their travel analysis process and their own reports, we could be on the losing end of a lot. So there's a lot riding on Wildcat Canyon and how it eventually will come out.
Yeah, and that area under the old forest plan is supposed to be managed as a motorized recreation area. And if they get away with just closing Wildcat Canyon without any real analysis, well, then the new forest plan will probably come out and switch that whole area to recommended wilderness, and there you go. There won't be any chance of reopening it at that point. So stop it before it gets to that point.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, Marcus, I think that, and I'm sure that I know I've heard Ben talk about this on other podcasts and things like that, but I know from a fact that just based on my own knowledge of politics and where we're at now versus even where we were at, say, 20 or 25 years ago, that the only way for us to move forward is to embrace the same method that our opposition has embraced here, which was they have decided to sue and settle. Well, then we have to defend our ground in the first place. That's number one. We got to defend what we got. And then the next piece to us is for us to go on that offensive and either sue and settle ourselves. And so we can, groups like Blue Ribbon Coalition and CORE and everybody else doesn't necessarily have to spend all that money litigating defense. They can actually go on the offense once in a while. But even more importantly, taking that to the next step. If you're looking, and I'm going to harp on this for the next 12 months until we run up along to the 2024 election. You can talk about whoever you want to vote to for at a lot of different levels. We're going to talk about public lands here, and I'm going to talk to you a lot about where your money is going. And if you're looking at giving your money to any politician, I don't care if they're Republican or if they're Democrat or if they're independent or if they're just some jackass on the street, think about giving that money to an organization like BRC or CORE or Colorado Trail Defenders, somebody who's doing the work for you so that we don't continue to lose this stuff. It's infuriating to me, and it's going to continue to be so.
Yeah. And one longer term thing, because in the short term, we can file lawsuits and all of that, but I'll tell you right now, lawsuits will not be as effective for us as it has been for the environmental groups, because the laws are overall on their side. They have so many different tools and so many, there's both procedural statutes and substantive statutes that give like wildlife and all these different things a right to not be harmed, basically. Whereas there are no statutory protections for recreation on public lands. And something I've been talking to Ben about, like that's something that really needs to change, because recreation is by far the dominant use of public lands these days. Because mining, logging, all of that's basically gone away and been kind of eliminated by the environmental movement. But recreation is something most people claim to support, and more people are doing it. But there are not really any statutory protections in law for a right to recreate on public lands. And that's what land managers take advantage of and say, oh, well, when push comes to shove, the law says we have to value bighorn sheep habitat over recreation. And so that's something that we need to push for long term. And it might need probably a more friendly presidential administration, a more friendly majority in Congress, but you're going to need to push the actual elected branches of government to take back the authority to rein in public land management and actually provide some statutory direction. Like, no, recreation needs to be at least treated equally, if not prioritized over some of these environmental issues. And there actually need to be statutory protections to say, no, you've closed enough. You can't close anymore.
Right. So or you've got to keep X amount open, right? You've got to keep X, percentage of land use or percentage of available public lands has to be open to motorized recreational use within a certain amount of distance. Those kinds of things.
And a good hook for that is the disability access issue. Because it really is an equity issue where people with can't hike long distances do not have access to our public lands because they've closed so much of it. And so
it's so and
create a substantive right for them to access public lands by motorized means. We all benefit.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think you don't think that it affects you. And if you're listening to this and you're 22 years old and you just got your Jeep a few years ago and you're really enjoying off-roading, you're like, that doesn't affect me because it doesn't matter. Again, all of the stuff we've been talking about today is in terms of decades. We're not talking about this stuff happened a couple of years ago. So when these decisions might have been, some of these decisions might have been made recently, all of these decisions were started 20 years ago, or all these decisions were moving in this direction 20 years ago. So if in 20 years, your knees aren't going to be what you think they are, and you're not going to be able to do what you think you can do.
We will all age and reach a point where we can't hike long distances anymore.
George Carlin used to say he loves entropy. And I used to agree with him in the idea that all systems are breaking down in nature. And I used to agree with him with the exception of my own personal body. So, all right. So, well, I kind of touched on all the big points that I kind of wanted to talk to today. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me was to kind of talk about this a little bit, kind of get a discussion opened up on it. This is not the last time the Trailhead podcast is going to talk about this. If anything, it's going to be a regular occurring thing, if not once a month, maybe more often. I think it's something we've all got to get way more involved in than we have been to date. I know a lot of us entered comments for this decision in Gemini Bridges, but I know Patrick said, he did a 500-page one. They didn't bother to read his, so I guarantee you they didn't read my one page. But the more of us that speak our voices, the more of us that get out there and explain to these people in power that not only are you being held accountable for your decisions, but there's a much larger group than you thought was here holding you accountable for your decisions. So, and I'll go around the room here. Marcus, I don't have a whole lot left to go. Did you want to talk about anything else? Is there any other points you wanted to bring up?
No, I would just say that one thing I tell people on the political spectrum, and I agree, you could be left, right, up, or down. It doesn't matter to me, but at your local level, you can even have an impact by, if you have town trustees, if you have county commissioners, if you have state representatives for your area, just ask them during the next year, during the election, how they feel about multi-use access to public lands. Like, just put it on their radar and frankly ask them, like, do you support multi-use recreation? Do you support public land access for everybody? Because in the case of San Miguel County in Telluride, like, that was a local issue. And if you're upfront and you ask these people those questions, you will put them on notice that they better think about it and they better have an answer into the future. And if there's a lot of us doing that, it will make a difference even locally before it comes up nationally. And that's something that we can all do wherever you live and whatever you do.
And I, again, coming from at least a parental political background, I'll tell you that every time you make contact with your elected representative, whether it's that county person or even your congressman or your senator, especially when you do those in person or you make those phone calls as opposed to just writing a generic letter or submitting a form letter, every time you submit those comments, that office knows that you're speaking for an outsized portion of your community. So if you live, in the Denver area and you live in a very highly densely populated area, your one phone call to your congressman might mean that they believe that there's another 100 or 200 people that think the same way you do. And the same thing goes for your local community. If you're showing up and making phone calls to your local elected representatives and saying, hey, this is an issue that's important to me, what's your position on it? Now they know that there's 10 or 50 or 100 people. So every time you make your voice heard, you're making your voice heard for others who either don't know, like Pope, you're just kind of getting into this whole discussion kind of in depth. You might not have known 2 or 3 years ago that you wanted to make a phone call like that, but someone tried to make a phone call for you on that behalf. And if we just keep expanding that umbrella, we can get that voice. I know we have. I know there's more of us. I know that. I just know it. Patrick, what do you got? Anything?
Yep, I agree with that.
No. Well. Do you got anything else that you wanted to add to all of this as a whole?
Let's see. I'd probably just say, go out and explore it while you still can. I think just on a little bit of a personal note, I've often struggled with just kind of the balance of how to keep this kind of stuff from getting to me too much and ruin the enjoyment of the hobby. But I think one way to do that is just, focus on the here and now and get out and explore this while you can, because it might not be around much longer. With Moab, probably have another month or two before the decision legally takes effect. So all these trails are still open right at the moment. If you can get there in the next month, you should still be able to ride all of this. Don't procrastinate.
And to Ben Burr's point that he mentioned on someplace else, if you go out to some of these trails, please take pictures, tag them in it. Make sure that if you use a site like Trails Off-Road or anything like that, make sure you submit a trail reviews and put your pictures in there so that other folks, even if they don't get a chance to go visit this stuff now, we have records. We have more stuff that we can put into these books later so that we can get that next generation of people pissed off and involved too. All of those things are super important. So, all right, Pope, you're the new one in this discussion. How you feel, man? You pissed off yet?
I was promising Randy I wouldn't express too much emotion about this because I do get kind of fired up about it. So, and I actually say stuff that makes me sound stupid. So I feel like this conversation that we had today is very educational. I really appreciate Patrick and Marcus taking time to talk with us about this today. It's really good topic. It affects a lot of people. I never thought it would affect me, and now it's something that I actually care about. I donate to Blue Ribbon Coalition, and we're happy to be part of that process to try to reverse these things or sue and settle if we must. However, we got to go about it. But I'm happy to be part of the discussion now.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I think we all kind of be in the place where I'd like to be in the place where none of this pissed me off. Like, I'd just like to go out and enjoy these trails and not have to worry about it. And then I hadn't been on riding trails for the 6 months before I found out about Wildcat Canyon and Hackett Gulch and the rest of it. And it was immediately ruined for me at that point. I'm like, well, now I'm involved with this because I know that if I don't want this to happen, I'm going to have to be involved with this kind of stuff. So go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I was going to say, with me, I didn't really get that period of blissful ignorance of it, because it turned out the very first time I ever went off-roading, before I bought my Jeep, a friend of mine from church took me off-roading on Hackett Gulch, and we drove the whole Hackett Gulch loop. And then I was just kind of researching about the area the night after I got home, and I was like, wait, all of that we just did is technically closed? I had no idea.
Yep. The exact same thing happened to me.
Yeah,
it's exactly my story about Hackett.
Yep. All these things. It's like, I mean, with my legal background and stuff, I always find the political side of my hobbies, but it's like, the very first trail I went on turned out to be this one I'm now in a lawsuit trying to reopen and all this stuff.
Yeah, and man, I wish this stuff didn't have politics. Yeah, I wish this stuff didn't have politics in it, right? It's just supposed to be fun. We're just supposed to be having a good time, but if somebody else drags it, you can't bring a knife to a gunfight, right? And that's a metaphorical gunfight. I don't want to get in trouble. It's just
politics finds a way.
Politics finds a way. There you go. We just need Jeff Goldblum and a really disturbing meme about that. All right, cool. So, thank you guys so much for joining us. I want to one more time. I want to plug the Blue Ribbon Coalition's Lost Trails book. And them as a whole, they're leading the fight on this closure. I know I don't have a whole lot of high hopes for it on a personal level because I know how these things tend to play out in the long term. They are our best bet at any kind of a fight to put up against this. And honestly, they're probably our best bet going forward as a community. If you've got a local group like CORE, get involved with them as well. Do the trail maintenance if you can. Do the rest of that stuff. But if you've got political dollars, by all means, donate them to organizations that are in it for you. And as a side note to that, the Blue Ribbon Coalition has a list of businesses that donate to them and a list of businesses that have donated to the SUA over the years. It's important where your dollars go, right? If they want to know that, hey, it's important that these companies who are donating to places that are closing trails to us, that there's a consequence to it in this day and age. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll close it out here, and that's about it. So thanks so much. We'll see you guys next time at the Trailhead.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day. Thanks so much.